Hey guys, what's going on? James here, and before we start this video talking about Ronald Jones and whether or not he can be a starting running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the stuff I've been saying regarding whether or not the Buccaneers should add a running back this offseason. Now, I know that I've been pounding the wall and saying the Buccaneers don't need to add a running back because they have Ronald Jones and he can be the starting running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I've been saying that all offseason, and that's what a lot of this video is going to be talking about. But I do think that, they could add a couple of running backs, backup running backs rather, this offseason via free agency or the draft. Now, should the Tampa Bay Buccaneers add a running back? Well, like I've said, I don't think they need to add a starting caliber type of running back this offseason because Ronald Jones is here, and Bruce Arians and Jason Licht have said, for the past basically the 11 to 12 months now, how much they have enjoyed Ronald Jones and how much they are excited to have him be, a significant part of Bruce Arians' offense. And they actually just said it as recently as the NFL scouting combine press conferences that Jason Licht and Bruce Arians held. They both said that they were very excited for Ronald Jones and they were very confident in Ronald Jones. But I do think that they could add some running back in free agency and possibly the NFL draft as well. And any running back that they add this offseason, because let's be honest, they are going to be adding a running back or two this offseason, I'll welcome them with open arms and I will be happy to have them a part of the team and I will be happy to see them contribute. And if they start somewhere down the line and, possibly even usurp Ronald Jones for the starting running back job, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. The point of this video is to just kind of talk about Ronald Jones and talk about why he could be the starting running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for this upcoming season. But in terms of adding running backs, while I don't think they need to add a starting caliber running back this offseason, that isn't to say that I would be, oh, this guy sucks, why did we add him? If they were to add a running back via free agency or the draft, I will welcome any new player to the team with open arms and I would be very happy to see them contribute. With that being said, let's talk about why Ronald Jones can be the starting running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, I know the title of this video is going to be, can Ronald Jones be the starting running back of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? I'm just going to answer the question right now. I think he can be. Last season was a very good progression for Ronald Jones compared to his first year with Dirk Koetter, which was absolutely abysmal. It was terrible. That really hampered Ronald Jones' development, in my opinion. Dirk Koetter just decided to not play a second-round draft pick pretty much at all. It was absolutely ridiculous. I did not agree with it at all. I still don't agree with it, and I still resent part of Dirk Koetter's coaching tenure because of that and what he did with a handful of rookies during his last season with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But Bruce Arians came in and he changed that around a lot. Ronald Jones saw dramatic improvement in his confidence and his overall play and his overall snap count, which was awesome to see. I do, however, think, though, that it wasn't enough. I still feel that there was too much of a split in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers running back group, not just as a pure rushing stats and things along those lines, but also receiving stats as well. I think that Peyton Barber took away from Ronald Jones in the running game, and Dario Ogunbowale took away from Ronald Jones in the receiving game. So in this video, I'm going to go ahead and break down first the rushing stats for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers running backs Ronald Jones and Peyton Barber, and then I'm going to go ahead and change some stuff around with those stats and show how Ronald Jones could have improved with getting more carries. And then in the case of receiving stats, I'm going to go ahead and talk about Ronald Jones, Dario Ogunbowale, and Peyton Barber's receiving stats, kind of give Ronald Jones more of the targets that Dario Ogunbowale and Peyton Barber received, and kind of show how much that could have improved his receiving stats as well, just to basically show what Ronald Jones could do if he's given even more opportunities than he got this past season. So guys, without further ado, let's get started talking about the rushing stats. So Ronald Jones finished the 2019 season with 172 attempts, which was 24th in the NFL, 724 rushing yards, which was 27th in the NFL, 6 rushing touchdowns, which was tied for 21st in the NFL, 4.2 yards per attempt, which was 31st in the NFL, and 45.3 yards per game, which was 33rd in the NFL. And I know that these numbers don't jump out off the screen, okay? Or they don't jump off the page, I guess I should say. All of them are in the bottom half tier in terms of running back stats for this past 2019 season, but the reason for that could definitely be attributed more to the pure split that he had with Peyton Barber Barber during this past season. Now, these are Peyton Barber stats. 154 attempts, which was 29th in the NFL. Look at how much of a split that is between the two running backs. Ronald Jones, 172 attempts, 24th in the NFL. Peyton Barber, 154 attempts, 29th in the NFL. Literally less than 20 carries apart between the two running backs. That's too much in my opinion. That is just way too much of a split. Peyton Barber's carries probably should have been cut in half, if I'm being honest with you, and we'll get to that part in a minute here, but way too much of a split. I think Ronald Jones should have been given more carries this past season. 470 rushing yards, which was good for 41st in the NFL. 6 rushing touchdowns, which was tied for 21st in the NFL. Himself and Ronald Jones, they both had 6 rushing touchdowns this past season. 3.1 yards per attempt, which was 47th in the NFL, and 29.4 yards per game, which was 49th in the NFL. So for as much of a split that we saw between Peyton Barber and Ronald Jones, again, literally less than 20 carry difference there between the two, look at how much more efficient Ronald Jones was, okay? 4.2 yards per attempt compared to Peyton Barber's 3.1. That's insane, in my opinion. Ronald Jones was just way more efficient, and I know 31st in the NFL doesn't sound good. I'll talk about what that number was in terms of the overall spectrum of the rest of the running backs in the NFL here in a little bit, but this just goes to show that the split really shouldn't have happened, because Peyton Barber, just to put it simply, was way less efficient than Ronald Jones in terms of being a pure runner. Here's what I went ahead and did, okay? I know how I just talked about how if you took half of Peyton Barber's carries and you gave them to Ronald Jones, we could have seen a big improvement in Ronald Jones' overall stats that would have looked a lot better on the stat sheet. So I went ahead and did that. I gave half of Peyton Barber's carries, which if you take half of 154, that's 77, and I gave them to Ronald Jones during the 2019 season. And then I calculated what his stats would have been based on his yards per attempt. I went ahead and multiplied 4.2 by his new carries that he would have had, which would have been 249. I'll get to the rest of the stats there in a minute. But I just did Peyton Barber. I didn't do Dario Ogunbowale because he only had 11 carries this past season, so that's not even worth putting down in terms of the overall research that I did for this video. But if you give Ronald Jones 77 more carries to add on to his 172 that he already had for this past season, these are the numbers that you get. 249 attempts, which would be 9th in the NFL for this past season. 1,046 rushing yards, which would be 14th in the NFL. Again, if you just gave him 77 more carries, half of Peyton Barber's carries, he would have been a 1,000-yard rusher. So that's just absolutely insane to me. He would have had 6 rushing touchdowns. I didn't decide to give half of Peyton Barber's rushing touchdowns to Ronald Jones because honestly, there's not a great way to calculate that, which would still be 21st in the NFL. But just for the sake of, calculating everything, if you wanted to give half of Peyton Barber's rushing touchdowns to Ronald Jones, he would have been tied for 8th in the NFL, which again is upper half of the league. 4.2 yards per attempt, which again is still 31st in the NFL. And then finally, he would have had 65.4 yards per game, which would have been good for 14th in the NFL. So guys, this is what I'm talking about. If you just took half of Peyton Barber's carries, which he was still 29th in the NFL, he had more than a couple of starting running backs in the league this past season, Peyton Barber did. So if you just gave half of Peyton Barber's carries and gave them to Ronald Jones, gave him a traditional starting running backs amount worth of carries, he would have been a 1,000-yard rusher, and he would have been in the top half of a lot of rushing statistical categories. 9th in rushing attempts, over 1,000 yards. I know people have said, oh, the Buccaneers don't have a running game. They would have. You just have to give Ronald Jones more carries, guys. He would have been in the top half of rushing yards this past season if you just gave him the ball a little bit more. So that's just kind of what I'm talking about. This split last season between Peyton Barber and Ronald Jones was absolutely ridiculous. And if you just gave Ronald Jones more carries as a pure rusher alone, we would have seen even better numbers from Ronald Jones in this past 2019 season. And I know people are going to point to that 4.1 yards per attempt, which was good for 31st in the NFL, and say, oh, James, see, that's not good. That's not efficient enough. It's got to be better. Well, I went ahead and I did a little bit more research, and Ronald Jones' 4.1 yards per attempt is more than all of these players I'm about to mention for the 2019 season. Austin Eckler, Joe Mixon, Tevin Coleman, James Conner, Todd Gurley, Melvin Gordon, Sonny Michel, Devontae Freeman, Le'Veon Bell, Royce Freeman, David Johnson, and Peyton Barber. Now, I know what other people are going to say, James, some of those guys have way more carries than Ronald Jones have. You got to calculate that. So I went ahead and I calculated that even further. And he had comparable rushing attempts to Austin Eckler, Tevin Coleman, James Conner, Melvin Gordon, Devontae Freeman, Melvin Gordon, Devontae Freeman, Royce Freeman, and Peyton Barber. Those are 7 guys who had a similar amount of carries to Ronald Jones, and Ronald Jones still had a better rushing yards per attempt. So all those names I just mentioned, those are very, very good running backs in my opinion. You know, besides Peyton Barber, he wasn't the most efficient this past season, but I just wanted to show that Peyton Barber was way less efficient than Ronald Jones last season. But all those guys I mentioned, they're good running backs, and I certainly know a lot of Bucs fans would have enjoyed those running backs in past years. But in terms of last season, Ronald Jones had a more efficient yards per attempt than all of those guys I just mentioned for the 2019 season. So there you have that. We're going to go ahead and we're going to go look into the receiving stats for all the Tampa Bay Buccaneers running backs this past season. First one, Ronald Jones, 40 targets, which was 36th among running backs this past season, 31 receptions, which was 35th among running backs, 309 receiving yards, which was 20th among running backs, 10 yards per catch, which was 8th among running backs with a 20 target minimum. So I counted any running back that had at least 20 targets or more. Ronald Jones was 8th in terms of yards per catch, which, hey, that's pretty darn good in my opinion, considering he was 36th in targets and 35th in receptions and 20th in receiving yards. He was an efficient receiver as well. And then finally, he had a 77.5 catch percentage, which was 25th among running backs, again, with that 20 target minimum. And I will talk more about that catch percentage a little bit later on and talk about, who it was more efficient than, much like what I just did with the yards per attempt number. Let's look at the other Bucs running backs right now. Their receiving stats: Dare Ogunbowale, 46 targets, which was 26th among running backs this past season, 35 receptions, 29th among running backs, 286 receiving yards, 25th among running backs, 8.2 yards per catch, 25th among running backs with that 20 target minimum again, and a 76.1 catch percentage, which was 26th among running backs, again, with that 20 target minimum. And Peyton Barber's stats, I'm going to still name them, but I don't expect much from Peyton Barber in terms of a receiving back, but he still received a decent number of targets. He had 24 targets, which was tied for 49th among running backs, 16 receptions, which was 52nd among running backs, 115 receiving yards, which was 56th amongst running backs, 7.2 yards per catch, which was 36th among running backs with a 20 target minimum. Now, much like what I just did with giving half of Peyton Barber's carries to Ronald Jones and then fixing the numbers and readjusting them, I gave half of Dare Ogunbowale's targets, so 23 targets, and I gave half of Peyton Barber's targets, which would be 12 targets, to Ronald Jones. And then I multiplied 77.5% for Ronald Jones' catch percentage, and I got 27 more receptions, and then I also got 35 more targets. So obviously he had 35 more targets. Well, how do you calculate how many receptions he would have had? Well, I just took his catch percentage and I plugged that into the target number, and then I was able to get a pretty accurate reception number as well. So taking a look at Ronald Jones' new receiving stats with 35 more targets and 27 more receptions, you get these numbers: 75 targets, which would have been 8th among running backs this past season, 58 receptions, which would have been 9th among running backs this past season, 580 receiving yards, which if you multiply yards per catch with the total number of receptions, that's how you get that 580 receiving yards, which would have been 4th among running backs for this past season, 10.0 yards per catch, which again is 8th among running backs with a 20 target minimum, and that 77.5 catch percentage, which would have been 25th among running backs still with a 20 target minimum. So I know people are going to freak out and they're going to say, oh, James, that catch percentage, that's awful. But before I start talking about that, I just want to say, look what happens when you just throw the ball more to Ronald Jones. He gets more yards. He was one of the most efficient receiving backs last year in terms of yards per catch. He was 8th. So if you just passed him the ball more instead of passing the ball to a guy like Dario Mbawale or a guy like Peyton Barber, you still continue to see top half running back receiving numbers for this past season. It just continues to prove my point of, if you just give Ronald Jones the ball more, he's going to do better, both as a pure runner and a receiving back as well. And I know people are going to say, oh, James, he can't catch the ball. 77.5 catch percentage isn't very good. It's not good enough. Guys, Ronald Jones' 77.5 catch percentage is more than these players I'm about to name for the 2019 season. Again, I'm going with that 20 target minimum. He had a better catch percentage than David Johnson, Melvin Gordon, Ezekiel Elliott, Dare Ogunbowale, Peyton Barber. I just wanted to name the 2 other Buccaneers running backs, Leonard Fournette, Tariq Cohen, James White, Nick Chubb, Philip Lindsay, David Montgomery, Rex Burkhead, Tevin Coleman, Giovanni Bernard, and Todd Gurley. Now, again, much like what I just did for the yards per carry number, David Johnson, Dario Mbawale, Peyton Barber, Philip Lindsay, Rex Burkhead, Tevin Coleman, and Giovanni Bernard all had very, very similar target numbers to what Ronald Jones had. And he still had a better catch percentage than all of them. Because again, much like what I just made with my previous argument for the running stats, some of these guys had a lot more targets than Ronald Jones. So of course, their chances of having a lower catch percentage would be greater. But David Johnson, Dario Mbawale, Peyton Barber, Philip Lindsay, Rex Burkhead, Tevin Coleman, and Giovanni Bernard, those 7 guys all had very similar target numbers to Ronald Jones, and he was still a more efficient receiving back than those guys I just mentioned. So very, very interesting in terms of, if you just gave Ronald Jones more of an opportunity as a receiving back and as a pure running back, not only would he have been a 1,000-yard rusher, he would have had over 500 receiving yards as well. Just pass him the ball more and just give him more carries, and we would have seen way better things. And that isn't to say that Ronald Jones didn't have a massive improvement from his last season, okay? The difference between 2018 Ronald Jones and 2019 Ronald Jones was huge, and it was really, really awesome to see, but, you know, it just left me wanting more. And based off of the numbers that I gave, just by, you know, cutting half of the targets that Dario Mbawale and Peyton Barber had, Ronald Jones would have been a much better receiving back, and he would have been, you know, a really, really awesome weapon just in the receiving game alone. Then if you go and you cut half of Peyton Barber's carries, we would have had a 1,000-yard rusher this year. And Peyton Barber, based off the numbers that I gave you guys, he wasn't an efficient enough running back. I know people, again, are going to point and say, well, 31st in yards per attempt, that's not good either. I showed which running backs Ronald Jones was more efficient in, both in the running game and in the passing game. Ronald Jones was more efficient in both those things than a few pretty darn decent running backs, in my opinion. So the point I'm trying to make of all of this, guys, is just give Ronald Jones the ball more, and I think that he could be a starting running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I've gone over all the numbers. I've even scrambled the numbers a little bit by taking half of Peyton Barber's carries and taking half of Dario Mbawale and Peyton Barber's targets, and then applying those new numbers to Ronald Jones just to see what could have been if we gave Ronald Jones the ball more. He would have been a pretty darn good running back last season. I think people wouldn't be asking as many questions about adding a running back this offseason if they just didn't have such a crazy split both in the receiving game and in the running game as well. But guys, thank you so much for watching this video. You guys already know my opinion, whether or not I think that Ronald Jones can be a starting running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The answer is yes. Just give him the ball more. Don't have these insane amount of splits between carries with Ronald Jones and Peyton Barber and passing targets between Dario Mbawale and Ronald Jones. It's just as simple as that, you know? Take some of Peyton Barber's carries, give them to Ronald Jones. Take some of Dario Mbawale's targets, give them to Ronald Jones, and you see a huge, huge difference. And to me, it's just as simple as that. But guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Hope y'all enjoyed. But until the next video or the next live stream, guys, I will see you guys in the next one. But until then, and as always, guys, goodbye for now, and go Bucs.